Today I wanted to have a bit of a chat to you about how to cope with other people's negative or almost disordered beliefs around food, and specifically people who are not necessarily within the eating disorder community or who even have an eating disorder. And I've just noticed an increase in this lately online around, I guess, influencers that or your sort of lifestyle influencers who I do tend to follow. I don't know if you guys dabble in their lives at all, but I find them quite fascinating. And also just with my family members and the people around me, I just noticed an increase in kinds of their own food anxieties coming up. And that can be quite hard to deal with when you are quite vulnerable to those anxieties yourself. So I just wanted to talk about how I deal with it. And I'm just struggling with the sun. Sorry, I just had to move because of the sun. So I think what's particularly hard about having an eating disorder and recovering is the fact that food is something that we all have an experience with, whether we have an eating disorder or not. We all have our own beliefs about food, our own emotional connection to food, and that's a human experience. And of course, some people's emotional connection and beliefs about food are more distorted than others. But I think to a large extent, because of diet culture, we are all influenced in some way to sometimes see food in a negative way and to sometimes feel guilty for the things that we eat. And that's, even if you think about the way in which unhealthy food is spoken about in terms of being a guilty pleasure or something that we need to almost repent of our sins for eating, it's not surprising that in some way we all do hold certain ideas around food being a moral thing or food being good or bad, evil, whatever. And I think also on top of that, food for all of us is entrenched within a form of control, a sense of being okay in the world according to what we eat. It's a way in which we all look after ourselves, and it's also a way in which we monitor our own kind of experience of being on the planet. So no one is immune to that, and men, women, children, we all have certain ways in which we interact with food. And I definitely think if we look at, I guess maybe women more specifically, we have all kind of developed certain ideas around the fact that there is a way in which we should eat, and that when we eat food that's high calories or that's perceived as being in some way an indulgence, that we should then try and eliminate that indulgence through exercise or whatever the case is. And I think through all these ideas we have all been really robbed of our enjoyment of food and also actually our enjoyment of exercise. That exercise isn't done for mental health reasons or just for feeling good, that it is always in some way linked towards burning calories. And I think that's also quite sad, but we will get into that in another video. I just did notice that I've heard the increase lately. I've really heard a lot of sayings around, oh, I've just been eating junk the whole week, or I've been eating like a pig, or whatever those traditional kinds of things that we're so accustomed to hearing are. But just because we're accustomed to hearing them doesn't mean that make them any less harmful and any less difficult to deal with, especially when we are quite used to comparing ourselves according to what we eat. And it can be quite hard to hear your mum or some celebrity that you follow speaking quite negatively around their own food consumption when you are trying to enjoy food or trying to improve your relationship with food. And I think for me, how I kind of navigate that is I just try to have an empathy for all people, and I try to realize that actually we are all going through a very difficult time right now, and that it's understandable that some people might be expressing that difficulty through the way in which they relate to food. And it's up to me to be empathetic to that and supportive of that person and try and understand what they are going through, and not take whatever they are doing or what they are saying as a personal reflection of me and my food intake. I think that's something that a lot of us struggle with, is thing around comparison and almost seeing, it almost becomes, I feel, competitive in nature around, I think eating disorders are notorious for being competitive, but like sense of, well, I can't, if the person that I'm with isn't going to eat dessert, then I can't eat dessert, that kind of thing. And in some way we need to learn how to separate ourselves from what other people are doing and do what's right for us. And as hard as that is, I think that's actually part of developing your own identity as a separate, beautiful human being who has their own unique needs. And recognizing the fact that we're all going to have different relationships with food, and that my relationship with food should not be dictated to or should not be influenced by another person's relationship with food. We're all on a journey, and just because one person's been diagnosed with an eating disorder and another person hasn't, doesn't mean that that other person doesn't also have disordered beliefs or ideas around food. And for the reasons that we discussed, it's so much part of our society. I know for myself, my mom will often say if she's eating like a dessert, she'll be like, oh, we're all going to have to go and like run around the block now, kind of thing. And as much as that is just such a common thing to say, it does immediately entrench a sense of guilt for having eaten it. And so what I've started doing in those instances is actually calling her out, in a polite way of course, but just saying, like, actually no, we don't, like, we can enjoy this and then we can rest afterwards. Like, there's no need to feel guilty for while we're eating. And so that's just what I do in my small ways, also just try and speak out something different to almost try and, I guess, help her with her own relationship with food. So that's the one thing, is actually calling it out in a kind way and saying we don't need to see food in this way. But the other real big one is just recognizing the fact that your relationship with food and how you eat has nothing to do with anyone else. And in the same way, you shouldn't be comparing what someone else is doing to you, because actually that has nothing to do with you either. So just as much as a lot of people might be on diets and a lot of people might be seeking out a lot of additional exercise during this time, or feeling or speaking increasingly negatively around food, separate yourself from that and recognize the fact that actually, because of the struggle that you are going through and because you're really having to grapple with the complexities of eating and food, that actually you can rise above that and you can be different and you can actually be a light in that situation. As funny as that might sound, sometimes I think because you do really have, because you've been placed in a position where you've had to interrogate these things, you are actually more in a position to actually shed light on these things and actually say, that's not junk, like no food is junk, like no food is trash, so please don't speak about it like that, just for an example. So in many ways, you are being empowered through the struggle that you are going through into turning into more of a light source in these situations and bringing more people into the realization that food isn't bad and that we don't need to be apologizing or following punitive measures to repent of eating certain foods. But also, I think what's important, specifically with influencers, and I've just noticed like a few of the influencers that I follow really started saying things like, oh, I'm going to have to be exercising harder because I've eaten this, or whatever the case is. I think sometimes it's actually about distancing yourself from those kinds of accounts. And if it's really bothering you, unfollow and don't engage with their content, because there's no need for you to take on their own food guilt. And if you need to do that, that's what you must do. I think we all need to actually be more in charge of our own mental health. It's not about blaming other people, but it's about saying, if this is not making me feel comfortable and this is not making me feel good, then I don't want to be a part of it. And that's, no one else can make that decision for you. It's about you having that self-awareness to realize that the stuff that this person promotes or is saying is not helping me in my own journey, and so I'm going to just remove myself from it, and I'm going to find accounts that are more positive and that are more uplifting and that speak about food in a way that's nourishing and healthy and good, and that because that's what I want, and that's what I want to hold on to during this time and any other time. So yeah, that's just what I really wanted to just press upon you right now, is just understanding that everyone is on this journey, that we all do have our own difficulties, that we do need to be empathetic, but that we can also actually be a light bringer in the situation, and that we can also remove ourselves from accounts specifically that impose or that in some way promote disordered ideas around food. And they're often not actually eating disorder accounts, they are just generally accounts that are within the beauty industry, because of course they're very concerned with appearance. So yeah, I think you need to hopefully just take the power back and take control of this situation and do what you need to do to protect your own recovery journey. Yeah, that's really all I wanted to say. I hope that in some way it might be helpful. Yeah, we are all in this together, and I'm sending so much love to all of you. Bye everyone.